Hello again. This is Stacey Sanderson back with part two of the video on narcissistic siblings. And so, in this particular talk, what I'm going to refer to specifically is about family dynamics, having a narcissistic sibling, or maybe more than one, and what happens as parents age within that family. And for context, at the very beginning of my career, well over 30 years ago now, this was something that I spent a lot of time with, helping families navigate high conflict sibling dynamics with making decisions for their frail or elderly or older parents. So, a situation where you very likely have a, a family system with a level of dysfunction in it, but you also have siblings who may be estranged or who may be in high points of conflict as they're navigating decisions for their older parents. And there are some fairly predictable patterns that are inherent in that, but the one that I've most commonly observed or hear about is you have a narcissistic sibling, or this could be the in law of a narcissistic sibling who has been suffering with that rather delusional entitlement, or I guess everyone else is suffering, but who has had their eye on the prize of the estate and or the financial decision making for the elderly or infirm parent or parents. They often have zero disregard for family law, the Healthcare Consent Act, and the Power of Attorney Act, which here in Ontario is the governing legislation for this decision making. So early on, they may make a bid to have power attorney to make decisions on behalf of someone who can't. They will try to challenge the mental capacity findings. I'll touch wood right now that that never happened to me in my career, but I know it has happened to some of my colleagues. They can be very, very, very controlling and manipulative with an elderly family member, right? So they can be almost too present. I've also witnessed that they're not particularly respectful of the rights or wishes of this family. So, what I'm talking about in narcissistic terms is you have a sibling who has always felt entitled to as everything financially and otherwise, and who then maintains that expectation, perhaps all the way into their 40s or 50s or 60s. And quite often, I think they've spent the money before they even get it. I know that sounds terrible, but I also know it to be true. So, given the narcissist's particular challenges, they may have had failed businesses, lost houses, not being able to keep a job, or, of course, they may also be doing quite fine financially. But the idea here is you have one sibling, usually, who, depending on the number of actual siblings, will get some on their side. So they get their minions, if you will, on their side, and then will, in a quite calculated way, alienate a particular sibling or siblings. And then this happens within the context of the formal legal decision making. So they will, for example, start saying terrible things to the parents about the other sibling or siblings. They create a smear campaign about those siblings that they do not want involved. They start influencing the way the parents, who are quite frail, see their other children. They will start to alienate the parents from those other children. But again, it's important to note that this dynamic starts years, decades before there is the actual impact. Um, they will want to be the only ones who have information about those elderly parents from healthcare agencies, family doctor, hospital. They may start taking things out of the home. They may want co-signing rights and access to bank accounts. I've heard that quite often. And I must say, they do this under the guise of being helpful, of being, the best care providers they can be. They very much identify with that role of caregiver, although quite often they're not. I mean, they're, if we think about how narcissists aren't good at, basic household responsibilities, just take that to the next level of actually needing to care for a frail person, and we can see how that goes. More often than not, this adult child has been the one enmeshed with a parent. Quite often, this is the case. And they literally see what belongs to their parents as belonging to them. Hasn't changed. It just intensifies as as an elderly parent becomes not as able to advocate for themselves or stand up for themselves. My experience with this is that if you're a nurse in the hospital, family physician, a personal support worker coming into the home, a visiting nurse, a case manager, someone like who I was, a social worker doing capacity evaluations, they will try to influence you and potentially bully you as well. And I've had that going way back. I've had that happen a handful of times because they are bullies, but they're very, very focused on what they think they're going to inherit. And obviously, I haven't said this yet, but the other thing they want to do is see the will and influence what that will looks like. So it's all of the chaos that they have created in the family system up to that point, but it shifts and is more focused on being in control of the decisions, the care, and the estate for elderly parents. Now, with this being said, I've also known highly narcissistic individuals to seek out a vulnerable elder. They will seek out someone whom they think may have some assets or some resources or who might be easy to manipulate. I've encountered that as well. I've had the good fortune of doing more than just psychotherapy. I've been, boots on the ground in the community, in the hospital, helping families navigate these situations, but also, having that responsibility of protecting the frail elderly as well. And I think that is one of the early ways I started learning about this. Although I don't think in 1995 we would have used those same labels, right? I don't think there was quite the same awareness, and what's going on with the mental health of a family member would not perhaps have been as salient as it is today. But it would be included in any kind of assessment information. So there are in Ontario systems in place to protect our frail elderly, one of them being the Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee. And we do have the Healthcare Consent Act and the Substitute Decisions Act, which is also there to protect people. And I think it's really important if you have a sibling, a toxic sibling that you don't trust particularly, that you have a very transparent conversation with your parent or parents, and that there be a clear understanding among all family members about who has the power of attorney document. I know everyone calls themselves powers of attorney, but that's not accurate. It's a document with names on it. If it is the sibling who is highly narcissistic, who has power of attorney, they have a legal obligation to keep you up to speed and to share information with you and to tell you what decisions they're making. Otherwise, you can challenge it in court and have that be reassigned or involve a trustee. So there are some checks and balances, but what's harder is getting around the level of control that they have secured, or the level of control that they now have with that elderly parent. And this is also, a real flashpoint of estrangement, a real flashpoint of fracture within families, unfortunately. But as I said, it is important, if you have a narcissistic sibling, that you have frank and transparent conversations with your family, with your parents, even though that may be uncomfortable. But in my experience, this is one of the most perhaps obvious, but also devastating ways that people who have highly narcissistic traits can really wreak havoc and cause pain on their path to getting whatever it is that they're entitled to. So I certainly hope this doesn't apply to any of you who are listening, but if it does, and if you know of anyone else who can benefit from this, please feel free to like, share, subscribe, send me a message if you'd like to talk more about this. But this really is based on the idea that knowledge is power, and that the rest of us are really just a force for good in the world. So with all of that being said, I wish you a very pleasant rest of your day, and take good care until next time.